Righty, I'm back again. One more day. Yeah, so um we're gonna carry on. Um I'm actually not sure if this is the next one, but I will just actually do this one. But then mentally I can't quite handle this very well. So yeah, so we'll just do this. It's only 36 minutes long. Okay, let us start.
A 14-year-old boy was tortured, he was murdered, and his body was dumped in a field outside Johannesburg. His name was Stompie Sepe. The name sounds very familiar to you, doesn't it? Yeah, it does, because if you're watching this, you might have been alive when this happened. It went everywhere. He was an anti-apartheid activist fighting for freedom. At 14 years old, what a kid. And he was killed, not by the apartheid police, as many would expect, at the time especially, but by the people who claimed to be liberating the country. His country. This is the story of how the ANC's mother of the nation, Winnie Mandela, became an instrument of death. How a woman said,
Please explain to me how I hope normal, sane people can actually support, idolize, uphold such evil that you can't recognize evil and good, that you will blindly follow and just fall off the the so-called mentality mountain.
celebrated as a symbol of resistance and as a role model to many young women, became a symbol of terror in her own neighborhood. How a child activist was silenced the very moment he was fighting for the very movement he was fighting for. Welcome to the story of Stompie. Welcome to the story South Africa still hasn't fully reckoned with. Now, before I begin, I just wanted to say,
I have got such compassion for to you, his mother. Her child was just thrown away. Her child's life was just thrown away. It meant nothing to the the leaders this child idolized. How depraved do you have to be to actually do this?
hello, and also thanks for coming back to the channel. And if you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button. If you've always been here, thank you so much. I super appreciate you tuning in again. There is a link in the description below where you can donate if you really appreciate this content, where you can buy me a coffee, because this type of content does not get any sponsors for obvious reason. So thank you for all the donations. Love you all. So how did the story of Stompie start? Well, very relatable to many political activists. He was the boy who asked questions. If you want to understand Stompie Sepe, you have to understand what he represented. He was 14 years old, 1-4, a child. But he wasn't just any child. You see, he wasn't just like us at 14 years old playing our PlayStations and sleeping. He was an activist. In the late 1980s, when most kids his age were worried about school, sports, and if they did their homework, Stompie was on the streets of Soweto fighting apartheid. He was organizing. He was speaking out. He was part of the mass movement that was bringing down the regime called the apartheid regime, and rightfully so. The Methodist Church in Soweto had become a sanctuary for young activists. The minister there was Reverend Paul Ferrin, and his manse had become a safe space where kids like Stompie could gather, could organize, and stay protected. Paul Ferrin was a white ally to the struggle. He was one of the many, many white people who supported the ANC. He was someone who opened his home and his sources and resources to the black youth movement. He was also against the apartheid regime, because what many people don't know is that there were a lot of white people who were actually against the apartheid regime, and that mattered. In 1988, if you
Thank you, thank you, thank you. There were a lot of white people that wanted it to end. And yes, it was starting. How many lies have been actually told? How many lies just to keep these greedy, selfish people in power? It amazes me that it's slowly starting to come out.
were a young activist, a safe space was everything, because the moment someone sees you, gone. So Stompie lived in this world. He was part of the youth movement. For someone who was born of my generation, this sounds absurd. What a world this was. I remember I'm a Gen Z. I'm one of the born frees, as they call us. We were born when everything was nice in the 2000s. Everyone is equal. We were born and everything was nice. But Stompie lived in a different world. He was part of a youth movement. He was part of the resistance. And by all accounts, he was actually good at it. He was respected. He was known. He had a voice. He wasn't like Malema telling you he was good. Stompie didn't have to say anything. He proved it. And then came December 1988. On December 29th, 1988, Jerry Richardson, the coach of the Mandela United Football Club, Winnie Mandela's personal security team, which was basically a gang, arrived at the Methodist Church. He didn't come to pray. Of course, he came to abduct 4 young activists, including Stompie. I did tell you, this was not some football club. This was a gang that was terrorizing Winnie Mandela's neighborhood. The reason why they kidnapped them was that Winnie Mandela suspected the Methodist minister of sexually abusing them. That's what he said. So when Jerry was asked, why did you take these 4 activists?
Yeah. Now, I don't know every single thing about this. All which I know, this child was actually killed. But now you see the lie. And we don't question, we don't think, we don't actually compare stuff, we don't know history. So, all right, if you happen to be really, really evil, I can really guarantee everything you do will be evil because I don't see change. I don't see you actually trying to actually do better.
Again, Jerry said, oh, Mama Winnie said we must take them because she's suspecting the Methodist minister who is housing them here is sexually abusing them. Spoiler alert, it was a lie.
Of course.
Hogwash, fabrication, cow dung, horseradish. A big lie, one of the many lies of Winnie Mandela. Another excuse to get the boys, those vulnerable boys who were sleeping, into her house. Actually, they weren't sleeping, they were playing cards. Watch the documentary. What happened next was systematic torture. They were taken to Winnie Mandela's house, and there they were told, oh yeah, remember that story we told you of the reason why we took you was because Winnie Mandela suspected the minister was sexually abusing you all? Yeah, that was a lie. You're actually here because we believe you're all mpimpis. An impimpi at the time, and even now, means informer. You're a whistleblower. So they believed that Stompie and the other 3 activists in that room were informers to the apartheid regime. With no evidence. There was no evidence to prove this. But because Winnie Mandela said it, it had to be true, right? So then they systematically tortured them. The 4 boys were beaten. Time and time again, they were interrogated that night. They were accused of being police informers. The beatings were coordinated. Winnie Mandela was present at the time of those beatings. Not my words, those are words according to multiple witnesses who would later testify at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. She participated in the assaults. That's the account of many witnesses. She punched them. She interrogated them ruthlessly. She was there. So then, something strange was happening. Because while they were being beaten ruthlessly into pulps, Stompie was singled out for special attention. You see, according to the testimony of Jerry Richardson, the coach of the club himself, Stompie was beaten far more severely than the other boys, and the other boys were beaten up pretty bad, but Stompie had it all. Why? Because Winnie Mandela accused him specifically of being an impi. Again, a police informer, a police spy. The irony was sickening. Here is a 14-year-old activist detained without charge, tortured, and accused of being the very thing he was fighting against with zero evidence to back it. The beating was severe. Witnesses described it as brutal, as vicious, and as inhumane. The boys were...
And until you, all the people standing there kept quiet and went along with it. Suddenly, nobody's got a voice.
Shamboked. They were lifted off the ground and dropped straight onto the concrete floors. They were tortured in what Jerry Richardson himself described as horrible, brutal ways, in the manner used to torture freedom fighters by the apartheid police. In other words, the ANC was using apartheid's own torture methods against its own children. Winnie Mandela just came from prison after all. She knew all about that. Stompie was 14 years old. To add on to all of this, this is the cherry on top. So this is a guy who had done nothing wrong, but it's also a kid. He's not a guy, he's a kid. 14, he wasn't a spy. He wasn't an informer. There was no evidence. He was a child asking questions. And for that, he was being destroyed. But this is where the story gets even darker. This is where things start to get wicked. You see, while Stompie was being endlessly tortured in Winnie Mandela's house, senior ANC leaders were trying to get him released. The Mandela Crisis Committee, a group of respected ANC figures, came to Winnie Mandela's house. They came there demanding that she release the boys. They said, Winnie, get those boys out of there. Negotiations lasted for 10 days. 10 days of pleas, 10 days of reasoning, of trying to convince Winnie that this was wrong. And she resisted every attempt. According to Richardson's later testimony with the TRC, Winnie...
So, basically from this inhumane torture carried on for until 10 whole days. And you want to tell me that men can't just walk in there and just say, we are taking these children? Oh. But I suppose it depends how many came and how many were there and all that. But
was concerned that the crisis committee would in fact discover the presence of the youth in her yard. According to Richardson, Winnie was worried she would be exposed. So she did what she had done time and time before when exposure was a threat. She eliminated the problem.
yeah, that's what she
Stompie
did.
had to go. The plan was set. Richardson and another football club member called Slash selected a location, a rocky patch of ground near a railway line in Nieuwedersig, Soweto. They waited for the right moment, but the visitors kept coming. The crisis committee wouldn't stop asking for these boys released. They kept coming and saying, Winnie, let these boys go. And then, several days after the abduction and torture, the window opened. Richardson took Stompie to the location they had chosen. By this point, Stompie could barely walk. He was very sick and very weak from the torture. Richardson's words, not mine.
He was broken.
Richardson had to help him to the spot where he would die. When they arrived at the railway line, Richardson made Stompie lie on his back. He took a pair of garden shears, yes, those garden shears, the ones your gardener uses to cut the branches, the ones you use to cut branches and trim the gardens to do work. He separated the two blades and he stabbed Stompie through the neck. I put shears through Stompie's neck. They went to the back. Richardson's words, the words he would later say in his TRC testimony. It was a stabbing motion, not a cutting motion. Like this, not like this, like this. A 14-year-old child, murdered with garden shears. His
all
throat
because
cut
of a lie.
to the back, his body dumped in a field. On January 6th, 1989, Stompie's body was found near Winnie Mandela's home. His throat had been cut. Stompie was dead. The official story was that he had fled to Botswana. Winnie Mandela was one of the people who claimed that he had escaped for obvious reasons. That was another lie she had told, one of the many, many lies of Winnie Mandela. Meanwhile, a child's body was lying in a field with his throat cut open as if he had been decapitated. This is who Stompie was, not a spy, not an informer, not guilty of anything except being a young, brave kid who was in the wrong place at the wrong time when the wrong people wanted to silence him. Stompie was a child activist who asked questions, and for that, the ANC's beloved mother of the nation had him murdered. That's what happened, in case anyone tells you an alternative story. To understand how Winnie Mandela became a killer, you have to understand the context. By 1988, Nelson Mandela was still in jail. He had been imprisoned since 1962. So this is 26 years he is locked away. So Winnie Mandela was the face of the resistance. While he...
Okay, and just Nelson was charged with 193 crimes, okay? Let us not think he happens to be so squeaky clean either.
was in jail, she was on the streets. Some would argue that at this stage, in that period, Winnie Mandela was far more popular than Mandela. She was the one giving the speeches. She was the one who was mobilizing. She became known as the mother of the nation. The world watched Winnie Mandela. They sympathized with her. They admired her for standing alone. Look at the strong black woman standing for what's right, which was great. But there was another side to the story, a side that happened in the darkness. Winnie had surrounded herself with a group of young men whom she called the Mandela United Football Club. Why do I keep doing this when I say that? Because on the surface, it was supposed to be just a regular soccer team, a way to mobilize the youth and bring the neighborhoods together. But it wasn't that at all. It was nothing but Winnie Mandela's gang, a private security force, a militia, a group of her enforcers who operated under her direct command, under her tyranny, who terrorized her neighborhood. They lived in her house. They answered to her and her alone, and they did exactly what she told them to do always. So this Mandela United Football Club thing was a sham. It operated according to Winnie's logic. If you were suspected of being an informer, you disappeared because that was Winnie's orders. If you questioned Winnie Mandela's authority, you were dealt with. Wink, wink. If you were a threat to her power, you were handled, you were eliminated. There was no trial, there was no due process. There was just Winnie Mandela's word and whatever punishment she deemed appropriate. By 1988, the Mandela United Football Club had been implicated in at least 15 deaths. 15 people, not...
So basically, she wanted all the glory, all the power to herself.
Cattle. Some were genuinely suspected of being police informers. So not only was this a gang, there were police informers in that gang. Others were simply people who had fallen out of favor with Winnie. Some were activists who questioned her tactics. All these people who did that were dead amongst those 15 people. The torture chambers weren't in secret police headquarters. They were Winnie Mandela's enforcers who stayed in Winnie Mandela's home. The torture chambers were not in these secret places. They were in Winnie Mandela's house, not in police headquarters. The interrogations weren't conducted by apartheid officials. They were conducted by her bodyguards. The murders were not ordered by the apartheid regime as people like to believe. These murders specifically were ordered by the women fighting the regime. This is the fundamental inversion that the Stompie case exposed. It exposed everything else. The ANC, the African National Congress, was supposed to be the good guys, right? Good versus bad. The liberation movement, the force fighting oppression, the unstoppable force versus the immovable object. But inside Winnie's...
But they aren't fighting the the anti-white people. They are fighting amongst themselves. What has changed? What has changed?
orbit, oppression looked exactly like what the apartheid state did. The same paranoia, the same torture, the same elimination of dissent, the same willingness to kill without thought and remorse to maintain control. When Stompie was brought to Winnie's house, he was brought because of a lie, because Winnie Mandela lied about him. The claim that Paul Verhoeven was sexually abusing young boys was never substantiated, by the way. It was nothing but an excuse. It was a pretext. It was something to justify the abduction. But once Stompie was in the house, the machinery of terror truly kicked in. According to witness testimony at the TRC, Stompie was singled out for worse treatment than the boys. Why? Because he asked the right questions. Or perhaps because he knew something the other boys didn't. Or perhaps simply because Winnie decided he was a threat. The reasoning didn't matter. What mattered was that they got him now. That's what mattered. Once you were marked in Winnie's world, your fate was sealed. The testimony of Katiza Bebekulu, who was living inside Winnie's house at the time, provided details of what happened. He said he heard Winnie Mandela accusing Stompie of, I quote, sleeping with a white man, referring to his association with the Methodist minister Paul Verhoeven. He heard her call him an impi, a police spy. He heard the violence, he heard Stompie's screams, and he saw Richardson carrying what he later realized was Stompie's body being taken away. Xolisa Falati, another woman who was close to Winnie, who would later testify at the TRC, said that Winnie had, I quote, the blood of African children on her hands, close quote. Falati admitted that she had lied.
And she is still idolized up until today. How many black and white people have been murdered because they got told a lie? I think it's a very good thing. I don't know exactly how many, because, yeah.
At Stompie's trial to protect Winnie. She had been instructed to fabricate the story. Was she paid for it? We don't know. But her words are, you have to take the orders and do and lie. That was our culture, to protect our leaders. Her words, she would later say. explaining why she had perjured herself. This was the culture Winnie Mandela had created. Absolute obedience, absolute protection, no questions asked. If the leader ordered it, you did it. If it meant lying in court, you lied. If
Yeah.
it meant covering up murder, you covered it up. The leader came first. Always. And Richardson, well, he was the main enforcer. He was the guy who actually killed Stompie. He stabbed the child with garden shears. He dumped the body. He did the physical work of murder. But he did it on orders. He did it
Makes no
because
difference as
Winnie
far as I'm
told
concerned.
him to do it. He did it because in her world, that's what you did when the leader gave the command. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission would later find that Winnie Mandela had ordered the abduction, Winnie Mandela had ordered the assault, and Winnie Mandela had ordered the cover-up. And while there was debate about whether she directly ordered the murder, the commission found her negligent in that she failed to act responsibly in taking the necessary action required to avert his death. In other words, she knew exactly what she was doing and she knew exactly what was going to happen. And she did absolutely nothing to stop it because she knew exactly what she was doing. But here is where it gets even worse. You see, after Stompie was killed, Winnie didn't confess. She didn't take responsibility. She created a lie. She told people that Stompie had fled to Botswana. She claimed that Stompie was in fact still alive. She fabricated a narrative to cover up the murder. And then, in February 1989, just weeks after Stompie's death, Abu Asvat, the doctor who examined Stompie after his torture and knew the
And
severity
one
of
more
his injuries,
murder.
was conveniently shot dead at his medical practice. Witnesses testified that it was Winnie who ordered the killing as well, that she paid for it, that she supplied the firearm too, in fact. In fact, she was eliminating anyone who could testify about what had happened to Stompie. This is who Winnie Mandela was. Not the mother of the nation, yay! Not a symbol of resistance. She was a killer, a woman who tortured children, a woman who murdered witnesses, a woman who created a terror apparatus that operated in her home, under her command, at her word. And for decades, she got away with it. All of it. In 1991, Winnie Mandela was then brought to trial for the kidnapping of Stompie and the assault of the 4 boys. It was a high-profile case, not just any case, a high-profile case. The world was watching. Nelson Mandela was about to be released from prison. South Africa was on the brink of transformation. And there was the woman the world had celebrated as the symbol of resistance, standing in a courtroom accused of torturing children. The trial was brutal. Witnesses testified about what they had seen. Survivors of the torture described the violence in very, very graphic detail. Jerry Richardson, the man who killed Stompie, admitted to the murder and said he did it on Winnie's orders. The evidence was overwhelming. It was overwhelmingly abundant. But Winnie's lawyers, who were led by George Bezos, I think that was the name, argued that the charges were politically motivated. They argued that she was being persecuted because of her prominence, right? Because she's Winnie Mandela, everyone wants her in jail.
And this is what lawyers do. They will twist things around. Oh, Winnie was having such a hard life, and boo-hoo-hoo. Evil, okay, is still evil. That's it.
They argued that the evidence was circumstantial, it was coincidental. They created doubt, they put doubt in there. And it worked. In May 1991, Justice Michael Stegman found Winnie Mandela guilty of kidnapping and being an accessory of assault. But he acquitted her of the actual murder. He sentenced her to 6 years in prison, 6 years. But then in 1993, on appeal, the sentence was dramatically reduced. Instead of 6 years, she received a fine and a 2-year suspended sentence. She never went to jail. This was the very first travesty of justice. The woman who had tortured children and was known for torturing children was essentially let off with a fine. The woman whose orders had led to murder was acquitted of murder.
And this just shows life means nothing to certain people. Nothing. Means nothing. And yet there are certain people that will, okay, celebrate evil. Stalin, Mao, Lenin, and the list goes on.
The system had failed. But there was supposed to be another reckoning. Because in 1997, South Africa established the TRC, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, what I was talking about the whole time. The TRC was supposed to be different. And by different, I mean different from traditional justice. So instead of prosecution, there would be confession. Instead of revenge, there would be healing. Perpetrators could seek amnesty if they told the full truth about what they had done. Winnie Mandela appeared before the TRC. She was questioned about 18 serious matters, including 8 murders. And what did she do? She denied everything. She called the allegations ridiculous. She said that her accusers were lying. She refused to confess. She refused to take responsibility. The TRC heard testimony from multiple witnesses. Katiza Bebekhulu testified that he saw Winnie stab Stompie with her own hands. His testimony was a problem. It was problematic. It was hesitant and contradictory, but it was there and it was made. Xoli Swafalati testified that Winnie had blood of African children on her hands, meaning Stompie was not the only one. Jerry Richardson testified that he killed Stompie on Winnie's orders. Witness after witness came forward. But Winnie Mandela would not budge. She wouldn't budge at all. She maintained her innocence. She suggested that her accusers had been bribed or coerced by the apartheid state. She played the victim, and in doing so, she robbed the victims of real accountability. The TRC found that she had been complicit in Stompie's death. In fact, they found out that she ordered the kidnapping, she had ordered that the gang beat the crap out of the child, and she had failed to prevent the murder. Or did she do it? And she refused to confess because she also refused to take responsibility, and there was no amnesty. There was also no prosecution. She was caught in a limbo, found guilty by the TRC, but never prosecuted for anything beyond the 1991 trial. She died in 2018. May her soul rest in peace. Never having truly faced justice for what she had done. Rest in peace, Mama Winnie. Never.
And this is what irritates me. This is what irritates me. If somebody's evil, you call it out. It doesn't matter whether they happen to be here or not. Evil, okay, happens to be evil.
Never having served time, never having expressed genuine remorse, she died never having taken responsibility of her actions. But perhaps the most painful part of the story is what happened to Stompie's mother, Joyce Sepe. She went to the TRC asking for compensation for her son's death. She wanted acknowledgement that her son had been wrongfully killed, that his life had mattered,
of course,
that his death deserved recognition. And what did she get? In 2018, almost 30 years after Stompie's murder, Joyce Sepe told media that she did not believe Winnie was involved in her son's death. Which is funny, because one day, Winnie Mandela's people came with a sheep in the boot. And they gave it to Stompie's mother. And Stompie's mother was saying, but in my culture, people bring a sheep to show that they are apologizing for something very big they did. They're admitting to doing wrong. So why is this sheep here? And Winnie's people said, oh, Winnie is just apologizing. And Stompie's mother was saying, apologize for what? Stompie's mother said she had forgiven Winnie. She said that during the TRC hearings, Winnie had told her, may God forgive me. This is the tragedy at the heart of the Stompie story. The victim's mother.
So, okay, help me understand this. So to actually give a person a sheep, that's supposed to rectify things, pardon things. I mean, surely, all right, life happens to be more than a life of a sheep. I am dumbfounded now. I mean, where is value in okay, life? That life. A sheep? Raving lunatics, man.
Had to forgive the killer because there was no other way to move forward. There was no justice. There was no punishment. There was only a mother trying to find peace in a system that had failed her. Winnie Mandela lived to be 81 years old. She served in parliament after apartheid ended. She held positions of honor. She was celebrated by some as a hero of the struggle. And the woman who who tortured children, who tortured activists and murdered them, who terrorized her neighborhood, who created a terror apparatus in her home, a gang, that woman died of natural causes in her bed, surrounded by supporters who still called her the mother of the nation. Stompie Seipeyi was 14. He died with his throat cut with garden shears. His body was dumped in a field like a killed chicken. His mother told lies about where he had gone. He never got to finish school. He never got to fall in love.
Oh, that's nothing new.
He never got to have a career or a family or a life. And the woman who killed him, who ordered him killed, or allowed him to be killed, depending on which version of events you believe, that woman still lived a full life. She went free. She was honored. Paintings were made about her. She made money. She was forgiven. This is the reckoning that never came. This is the justice that was never served. This is the truth that South Africa has never fully faced. The ANC's death camps did not end with Mbogoto. They continued into the 1980s
Yeah,
in Winnie Mandela's house.
yeah.
And when they were finally exposed, the system chose healing over justice. It chose moving forward over accountability. The cost of that choice.
Okay, if that is true, then why are we always being told that that the white people have to now pay? There is so much lies, hypocrisy, and yes, anger, frustration as well. Because we don't talk. We don't want to talk. We'll talk amongst ourselves, but not talk. Yeah, anyway, that's it. I'm very glad this is actually over. Alrighty, people. I will see you on the next one. Bye.